Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia, chapter 305. This is going to be my review of it. Now, before we get into it proper, I just need to very quickly talk to two commenters. Leela, you were right, I was wrong. I misremembered. I couldn't find anything to back up my claim, Leela, so I was wrong. Thanks for bringing it up. And White Despair. I remember during the live stream you mentioned that Izuku was going to remain in the vestige world. I didn't understand what you were saying because I thought something else was happening. As you remember, I thought Izuku was leaving. You were right. Just wanted to acknowledge that, White Despair. Anyway, guys, hello. We're coming into chapter 305. And also, thank you everyone for comments last week. You guys pointed out a lot of different things, and I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for getting involved in the community. Again, it really helps. It really helps, and you are appreciated. Anyway, chapter 305 officially. So let me tell you, when we were looking at the spoilers, I was feeling kind of underwhelmed with the chapter. But once you actually get into the chapter, there are quite a few pages that don't really contribute much. But the pages that are valuable, I feel like they have a lot of hidden meaning to them. When you look at what's being said, and I will go through some of my interpretations of what's going on here, because in this one, Horikoshi actually did a pretty good, I don't know, he did a lot of really cool things here, and it ultimately feels really good. Although, like on paper, we had an interesting conversation about this, but this is one of those chapters where if you really like characters, you're probably going to enjoy it. But if you're one of the persons that really likes plot, you might not enjoy it as much, because this chapter is essentially reaffirmation for Izuku. Although it's not the worst reaffirmation for Izuku. Like, there wasn't that much Izuku propaganda here that was in your face. This was actually, like, I think, well executed in terms of propping up Izuku without making it just really obnoxious. So good on him for finding a balance here. I will say something, though. Horikoshi could not keep his colors straight. This was Nana last week, and this is Nana this week. I looked back at the previous chapter, and the only time that Nana had lost her sleeves in the previous chapter was right before she started talking to Izuku at the final page. So what I think happened is, I don't think this is Horikoshi's fault, because usually the shading, as I understand it, can be handled by the assistants. Likelier that an assistant screwed up on the shading, and it's unfortunate, because I actually liked Nana's costume from last week. I like that variation more. Whatever, you know, another little error to chalk up for this era of My Hero Academia. Anyway, I got no other big general notes. We're going to jump into the page-by-page walkthrough. Page 1. So, aside from good art, I don't think there was anything really worth talking about here that wasn't covered later. Page 2 and 3, I think they work together. So the big thing that you need to take from here and the rest of the chapter is that the author starts really setting up how different Izuku is from the other vestiges. And the way he does that is by having the predecessors questioning Izuku's conclusion about Shigaraki. Again, I appreciate that this wasn't as ham-fisted as it could have been, and it does show the difference without having to actually tell the reader, hey guys, look, Izuku is so much different. Izuku is the true savior here. I'm really glad that we didn't have to go into that level of distinction. I actually do really appreciate that by the end of the chapter, it's still very respectful towards the previous vestiges. Anyway, on page 2 specifically, we find out the vestiges can feel share, or in other words, they have an empathetic connection to Izuku. And on page 3, we have the brother guessing at All for One's plans. Now, interesting story here. Commenters White Despair and I think Jason, I hope I'm not messing up your name, Jason, they have trouble believing that All for One wants Shigaraki's body, and that's all he wants. He just wants to take it over. And really, they have good reason, given some of the lines that All for One has had in the early My Hero Academia. Anyway, the reason I bring them up is because commenter White Despair made the really great point of saying he was going to borrow my methodology and say dead people aren't reliable, which really is a safe motto. And so obviously what he's referring to is that he's questioning the conclusion. For me, I believe All for One is going for a symbiotic body jacking. I think he needs to keep some level of Shigaraki's agency because he needs to keep Shigaraki's hatred, but he probably wants to have Shigaraki like an attack dog or something like that, which obviously Shigaraki wouldn't want. But anyway, White Despair and pretty much anyone else, they would be right to question the conclusion that the One for All vestige is having, and the simple reason is just the vestiges consistently show us that they don't know what's going on fully. If you say that the vestiges are always right, you are wrong. There's just no way to reconcile that. For instance, last chapter, the vestiges admitted that they were wrong with the conclusion and only updated it when new info was presented, that being when they were talking about the stuff that All for One ended up sharing with them. And in this chapter, we flatly see the vestiges pointing out that they thought All Might finished off All for One, but All for One is too much. The big issue here is the vestiges really can't predict All for One perfectly, and to the brother's credit, even he acknowledges that his conclusion isn't certain. Again, when someone says it's likely, that doesn't mean that it's 100% guaranteed. Realistically, you could say there is at least still a 10% chance of failure. So really, personally, I agree with the brother. But anyone that's apprehensive about that conclusion, you have a full right to be apprehensive about the conclusion. Chances are All for One has 5 different plans in case one of them fails, right? Like he probably has multiple plans going off in the background. Page 4, super interesting. The Quirk stealing started with Banjo and N, which nice to know his name. Now recall though, Hikage went into hiding trying to avoid All for One, which indicates that there was a significant knowledge base saying we should not mess with this guy if we're not careful, right? This does bring up the question of when exactly did All for One realize that his brother was still around. It's possible that since Hikage held it for 18 years, he really supercharged it enough that All for One started noticing the vestige, but it's really tough to say. Anyway, the rest of the page is them explaining that stealing One for All is pretty much a battle of whales, of justice versus intense rage. So this page again just says that Shigaraki is a battery for All for One in order for him to take over One for All. Also, note the 2 distorted lights representing the 2 All for Ones. I thought that was neat. Page 5 just follows from page 4, but there's something interesting here, this panel. This might be subtle storytelling, and this is one of the ones I really respect. Look at the wording of the dialogue for this particular panel. One for All is tasked with destroying All for One. The emphasis on this one is obviously on task. See, a task can't exist without one person making the meaning and another receiving it. Drawing these 2 in particular in this panel actually works really well. The read here could be, I, the brother, was the one that entrusted the first task to my successor. When we talk about the inception of the self-established task, it makes total sense to bring up the first and the second. So really good panel work for the author on this one. This was very appropriate. He could have just had the brother with a face shot instead of actually having the context that comes with the idea of a task. But again, the author was on fire with the panels and the dialogue placement in this chapter. I will say too, if there is some kind of timey-wimey shenanigan going on, because of the way that the brother is talking about One for All, like how he talks about like this seems to be like a bigger thing. If there is timey-wimey shenanigans, having that second user there could also be very interesting, because if the second user is actually the one that told the brother of the basic premise for the task, this little panel ends up being even more monumental. Assuming the craziest theory that guy in the background is some kind of timey-wimey shenanigan going on, but I don't think this is time travel. That's just like a fun little thing there. I mean, the author has enough space to maybe do it if he wants to, but I think that's not going to be a good move. Page 6, Nana is pretty much Midnight. What I mean by that is that she's bringing up the same rhetoric that Midnight did with the kids over at the mansion. What you take away here is that she's conveying the same regret of having no choice but to involve children. Page 7 is a callback to the butterfly imagery, which I thought was really good, and Nana talking about the realities of the world. Page 8 was essentially asking Izuku if he's ready to be Hawks. Page 9 is a somber affair with the users in order. N looks pretty weird. He's holding on to his hand. That might be interesting. I don't know if that's the hand that he lost, but that would be interesting if he's holding on to it because of some kind of, well, grudge. Page 10 was the really interesting page. I think this is where the chapter starts to become really interesting. The author chose a very curious inception point, because this one has more interpretations. He picked the moment before the quirk activated and everything went wrong. Now, the reason this is interesting is because this critical point doesn't overtly involve All for One yet. For me, I would have thought that the author would go for the moments that Shigaraki wasn't helped when he was wandering the city, because Shigaraki pointed out that that was a critical moment for himself back in his flashback chapters. But taking it back to Tenko before he kills his dog, the important thing to see here is that the Tenko we see here is the one that was made a victim by a father who was in turn lashing out at his son over his own abandonment issues. Picking this moment, this is the Tenko who is suffering because of the crime of being inspired by a hero, that being his grandmother. But this ultimately makes sense because it's the Tenko that was inspired by his grandmother that seems to be fighting back within Shigaraki's subconscious. What this Genesis point suggests is that Izuku's helping Tenko won't just stop at him saving Tenko from All For One. It's going to go all the way into dealing with the weird stress itch that Tenko had. Which again, you know, it may have been caused by All For One through some kind of weird shenanigan, but you know, tough to say. If it's standalone, if it's something else, you know, it'll be cool if Izuku can fix that. Anyway, now that the author has used this image, I hope he sticks with this image. Picking this at the critical point might also imply that Izuku's going to end up watching what exactly happened on that night and all the gory details from this point forward. But of course, this all relies on the author picking this shot for a logical reason, as opposed to an emotional reason like, oh, I just wanted to make the viewers really feel, and this was one of the best shots I had of Tenko. I'm hoping for the logical follow through here. Page 11. So initially I was going to really criticize this page, but actually seeing the Viz translations, this page ends up being pretty genius with the placement of the panels and the dialogue. So the genius here comes specifically with Gentle's panel and the dialogue used on it. What Izuku is saying is that if he could understand what made them, referring to Muscular, Shigaraki, and Stain, turn out how they did, maybe their battles could have ended more like how Gentle's did. And don't argue with me on this one, Izuku understood Gentle deeply. Let's recall, he told Gentle that he saw him fully, and he also observed that Gentle was pretty much the bad ending for Izuku. Gentle, meanwhile, also saw commonality in Izuku. That's the understanding element. With that element, Izuku still had to fight. But remember how that fight ended. Izuku applied a degree of mercy in downplaying the event. And mind you, Izuku had a lot of things that he was protecting that day, as we know. But he was still applying mercy to Gentle. Gentle was saved from going down a worse path. The police even flat out say that to the readers. And the Gentle Izuku fight was all about the two coming to see and understand each other. So what Izuku is thinking here is that he would have liked the previous three ending on a note like Gentle's fight. That being, that fight ended on a relatively positive note, because one of the big things that Izuku saw was the bond between Gentle and La Brava, and that was a positive bond. You know, I'm a massive Gentle fan. I think the Gentle fight is the fight that showed Izuku becoming more like All Might as a symbol for the first time, and I'm just really happy to see Gentle getting a distinction here and not being lauded together with the other three. Because Gentle is pretty much one of the best Izuku success stories that I think that's currently in the manga when it comes to the idea of saving people as opposed to stopping them. Page 12 is the Shigaraki Izuku page. Really pretty page with a powerful message, I think. For this page and subsequent pages, you can see that the author wanted to play up the innocent earnestness of a child. Now, interestingly, Izuku, I think, is still as innocent as he was when he was a child. The author didn't need to use it because teenage Izuku would still have worked, but for the imagery, child Izuku works really well, and using child Izuku in the subsequent pages lets the author use Izuku's formative point as a contrast to Tenko's formative point. And this is where it gets interesting, because when you talk about formative points, some things become a little bit more complex. Remember, Izuku's adoration of heroes let Izuku get to where he is right now, and Tenko's adoration of heroes also led him to where he is right now. And that's where the contrast happens. In this panel, these two kids are where they are because they were both inspired by heroes. And that's where the tragedy is. For Izuku's case, he gets to live a normal life, whereas for Tenko's case, he got in trouble for it. That's where the contrast is here. These are two kids who both have the same love in their heart, but one of them is suffering because of it. Also, I think for like an extra visual bonus, you have Izuku wearing white versus Tenko's black. That's an interesting little distinction there. And we also have Izuku with an All Might shirt and Tenko wearing a black shirt, which I don't think it is, but it could be a cue to Nana, because Nana just wears pure black for her bodysuit. I don't think it's that deep, but like if someone were to make the argument that that's what the author was going for there, I wouldn't argue against you, because you have enough to say that. You have enough to make the argument. Okay, page 14 is the You Guys Rock 2 page. This is the page that tells me that it makes me willing to bet that the author is going to have All Might at some point reevaluate the other predecessors and say that they were pretty awesome too. I don't know if the author would have All Might say that they were worthy chosen ones as well. All might give the other vestiges a new accolade, just because like the way that some of the things come off with how All Might downplayed them earlier. I think like I think the author might want to lift them up again. The reason I say is because Izuku lifts the vestiges himself up to All Might's height. So Izuku's pretty much put them on the same playing field as All Might. And I do legitimately think All Might's going to reflect the goodwill that Izuku has in this situation. Page 15 is Vestige All Might crying. I'm really hoping real All Might will be crying because of the Vestige link. You know what? I'm going to bet on it. Real All Might is going to be crying when Izuku wakes up. So Izuku's going to see All Might crying. And I do believe All Might's going to be saying something like maybe, oh, I don't know why I'm crying like this, but hey, welcome back. I think especially given that the Vestiges can feel what Izuku's feeling, I feel like that wouldn't be that hard to say that there is an invisible emotion connection between All Might and the Vestige at this point. Then, page 15, the tiny Izuku image forming within Vestige World. That was a really cool, powerful moment, actually seeing Izuku fully form. If I was to guess at the power interpretation here, I'd say that in this one moment, taking that purity of Izuku's thoughts, Izuku's feelings might have peaked so high that for this small moment, he was 100% synced with One For All. I feel like what this means is that if Izuku ever needs to tap into extreme power of One For All, the author might have him focus on this one little moment, the idea that he wants to save the little boy. Now, that said, there are implications to turning this back into child Izuku, and we're gonna like step away because I think this all works in the framework of Hero Academia. But if we step away from the framework of Hero Academia, things get a little interesting here because usually the idea of a child is this incredible innocence, and you can definitely see the innocence here, although again, Izuku's perspectives are the same as he is now as a teenager. The problem with using the innocence of a child is that usually the innocence of a child doesn't work well in legitimately bad situations, like where you only have two bad options. And you know, in this whole time we also have Izuku talking about wanting to save Shigaraki, and it is important to note that to be able to save someone as opposed to stopping someone requires much more power, and it depends on what kind of narrative you have. If you have a cynical narrative, these kind of ideas may not usually work. If in an idealistic narrative like Hero Academia's, it's okay for them to do it because they can make it work. The idealism will stay there, but it always is very interesting. Can the innocence of a child deal with the more subtle evils in the world, like say grooming or emotional manipulation, or you know, like more situations like that? This is where the innocence of a child kind of breaks down. But again, the big point here is that for the purposes of Hero Academia narrative, this is a really powerful moment. And the other thing too that really makes me think about this is that the author is doing a pretty good thing in having Izuku acknowledge that maybe there's no other thing that can be done besides killing Shigaraki, and that Izuku doesn't know what he's doing. Like those lines of actually making Izuku think about the negative consequence actually adds a lot more value to that moment when Izuku says he wants to save that little boy. Good stuff overall. Page 16 is a feel-good page. Nothing really worth talking about there. And then page 17 is the Nana page. I'd really like to know how she knows that Gran Torino is still alive, personally. That's my big question. But she follows up on she actually answers Gran Torino's question about whether or not they made a bad decision. Now, one thing I will say here is that I don't think Nana was in a good spot. I think any choice she made, she would have lost. Because All For One is that kind of person. I don't think she made a bad decision in the sense that if she kept her son, what's going to happen? Oh, I know. All For One's going to find the son and it's going to screw him over unless she sends him to America. Like, really, that's the only way out. If Nana's saying that, oh, I should have sent my son to America, then sure. Because America somehow is how everyone's able to survive. But it's a tough situation. And the problem is because All For One is just that tough of an opponent. I think Nana was fated to lose no matter what she did. I mean, All For One is super competent. He's not the kind of guy that can just be beaten with a one-step plan. And I don't think Nana would have been capable of coming up with a 5-step plan. Or, you know, I don't think she would have been able to match All For One's intellect. Anyway, on page 17 is the interesting thing where we have the brother telling the other two that they have to cooperate. So this was really interesting because now this is what's saying that the two aren't working with, or like they're facing away from Izuku because, well, they don't fully accept Izuku. Well, I guess that's the read on this situation. I'd really like to know what's going on. So now next week, it looks like we're staying in Vestige World for one more chapter at least. I do wonder if next week is going to be Quirk exposition. Are we going to find out about En's Quirk? Because that'd be really cool. And then, are we going to find out about one of these two guys' Quirk? Now, given the situation, right now we can see the eye of the third user. So I feel like the third user is going to be the one to turn around. I'm not sure if the second user is going to turn around next chapter, because the second user can still stay as a mystery point. So if I was to make a guess, I think next week is minor Quirk exposition. En reveals his Quirk. Maybe they give some advice, and third user reveals his Quirk here for Izuku. And then maybe second user gets interrupted with Izuku having to wake up now. Maybe we get a reveal for second user at the end of the chapter next week. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy. With this chapter coming into it, I was happy that we got a lot of the things that I was thinking about correct, right? In the last chapter video, I even brought up that she's probably going to say something that she was testing Izuku. So I love that we got that. I thought we were going to end the chapter with the one for the brother, talking to 2 and 3, and we did get that, but my big mistake was assuming that Izuku was going to leave. So no, we're actually getting it here, so that's a nice surprise. And we got the confirmation that it's Tenko that we gotta save. That the thing that's still inside of Shigaraki is Tenko. I'm so happy about that, because I know many people disagreed with Tenko being the factor inside of Shigaraki causing the friction. But here we go. Like, it's actually the kid who was penalized for liking heroes. That's the core of what Izuku's gonna save. So overall, I'm very happy with this chapter because of those confirmations, and I'm excited to see next week. Yeah, my predictions for next week is third user and ends definitely, maybe power exposition. Anyway, guys, let me know what you thought down below. Let's leave it there, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.